see if this will work now. Shall we? Mm-hmm. Okay. Let's see if... of course. Turn that off. Sorry, air conditioner. Okay, so are we live? It looks like yes. Okay. And manage concurrent viewers. Let's see. Yeah, no, you go away. Live currently shows. Moderator. Here's where I put in timeout or hidden. Got it. Okay. Over here. There we go. Close. Okay. Okie dokie, folks. I'm very sorry for such a rough start. I had a little trouble getting the software to do what I wanted it to do. But now it appears we're up and going. So, and there's YouTube telling me that I am live. Excellent. Okay. That took a minute or three. Let's get this up and going here before everybody decides they don't want to watch anymore. Okay. You future viewers, enjoy. If you are live, feel free to ask questions here, and whoops, and I'll answer when I see them. There we go. Okay, so quick little message for anybody who catches that. Drop that down. All right, well, we're going to hope that all this is coming through and just hop back in here to make life easier. Okay. So for starters, we're just going to go right to the beginning. Right off from when we hop into the game and we initially go into create a new character. So that's what we're going to do right from the start here. We're going to go with balance just because it's easy. It's right in the center. And I have been told by a few people that it's actually kind of hard by comparison, which is interesting, but that's okay. Hopefully, I am me. This is not your first adventure tutorial. you've already seen will not appear again. If you'd like to see them again, you can reset to 0. Excellent. Okay, good to know. All right, so the whole point to the start of this stream series, this is basically the series that I'm doing currently, is going to be to help people get familiar with the different parts and pieces of this. If you've never played D&D before, or if you're not familiar with the Forgotten Realms or Dungeons and Dragons or anything else that the Wizards of the Coast now has, that D&D races have changed quite a bit over the years. Classes have changed quite a bit over the years. What's available for people to play, what's out there, what's not. Many of the things that are right here in the race selection were not in any of the recent, up until recent, rather, base versions of the game available for players. I mean, to start off with, D&D used to be you had your class was fighter or elf. Elf was actually both a race and a class initially. Fun little fact for you that's also kind of a weird twist. So, like, people, Tiefling has only been available in the most recent things. Dragonborn, same thing, only since, I think 4. D&D 4 was like the first time you could go through and do that, and that was only with an expansion. Githyanki has not been available until very recently. Gnome, halfling, I think even half orc were added a little while ago. Dwarf has been around since the beginning. Elf has been around since the beginning. Human has been around since the beginning. Your human, elf, and dwarf were all very, very common from the beginning of the setup for it. Half elf came around not long after. So there's been a lot of different options, but they just keep expanding over and over again. So, short version, what we're going to do. I'm going to talk about the different races and the different classes. I'm going to talk about combinations that are traditionally thought to be good combos, and I'm going to also talk about why it's fun sometimes to play against type. I've actually gone through on my own playthrough and created a dwarf, Durgar, monk, which normally, if you were looking at it, wouldn't make any sense. He actually looks a lot like this guy. Interestingly enough, beard's a little different, eyes are different, but just in general, that's not a combo that most people would think to do, because normally dwarves are thought of as powerful, short, stocky. They're the rowdy drinkers, not the disciplined, lithe, high dex characters that a monk is. So, backing up to go back to our initial part here, we're going to take a look at it right from the beginning. We're actually going to go a little bit back and forth with these, partially because I think it just makes sense to take them kind of in order of the way they came out, and also in order of least to more complicated in kind of a roundabout way. So your basic human is just what it sounds like. They are the most common race in all of Faerun. Humans are these fonts of possibility. The entire point to playing a human is you can relate because you're human. Whether you want to admit to it or not, we are all human. When it comes right down to it, your human character does have some advantages to it. And I think it actually even comes in here. Human, there it is, human versatility. Select an additional skill to be proficient in. Your carrying capacity is also increased by 1/4. So you can carry a bit more because humans are some of the larger characters. They're not the biggest. We'll get into those in a little bit, but they are some of the bigger ones, especially if you go with Beefy Boy here in the secondary body types, which I think are kind of funny, that they have multiple ones in there. So our, excuse me, our big old boy here, humans have the ability, like it says, to get additional proficiencies. So that additional skill to be proficient in. So if you are looking at, I don't think it actually has. Yeah, I don't think it actually breaks it down here. Oh, it does actually show over here, those skills. So your athletics, acrobatics, religion, insight, persuasion. So that's also where you find things like your sleight of hand, your history, your perception, your different skills that your character has are all in that huge list that they've got going on there. If you are proficient, it means that you can add a bonus to that skill, which is how people get like a +10 proficiency for things like sleight of hand or stuff like that. So it's how you can be better at something. You have trained in it, or your character is trained in it to be really good at what that is. Humans automatically gain an additional skill that they are proficient in. So that's a nice bonus to begin with. So instead of having the normal 4, humans get a 5 right off the bat. Which, again, for a beginner player is not a bad thing. It means it's one more thing you can add that bonus to and not have to worry about. So what if you're only half human? You're half human and you're half elf. So you're still half human. The other half is an elf. Let's see, dark vision. Now you've gained dark vision, which is great. Now you can see in the dark without needing a torch. You also get an advantage on being charmed, and you can't be put to sleep by magic. Great little bonus. Same thing if you're an elf, you can't. You also, Fey ancestry, you can't be charmed or put to sleep by magic. The half elf is basically just like it implies, it is the halfway in between a human and an elf. So what is the other half of what you're getting here? Your elven weapons. So your long sword, short bow, and longbow, the different ones that, believe it or not, long swords are not a very common proficiency. If you are a fighter class, they are. If you are an elf, obviously it's part of that. If you're a half elf, it's actually not, intriguingly enough. It's intriguing because certain weapon styles are definitively initially available right off the bat for different races. Like elf, Githyanki is another one that you start right off with being proficient in short sword, long sword, great sword. Because the Githyanki's background is that they are Illithid, which are the mind flayers, Illithid hunters, as their primary thing. The biggest reward they can get is to be a dragon rider with a silver sword chasing after mind flayers. So it's part of the reason why their race features the swords. Short sword, long sword, great sword are part of their initial proficiencies. Just kind of makes sense. A lot of these things, when you get into the backgrounds, do make sense. So right off the bat, one of the most common races that people pick when they're first starting out with D&D is a half elf. The reason being because you're not a full elf. You haven't gone full elven. You are half human. You are half elf. You get the racial bonuses of not being able to be charmed or slept. Like it says, curious, ambitious, and versatile. Half elves are welcome everywhere, but struggle without a community to call their own. So really what it is you are half elf and half human. So both sides see you as neither wholly either one. And you can, of course, make the equation for that and mixed race in our own society nowadays. It's a pain in the butt on both sides of it. Which is, kind of awful. But it is interesting that you get the allegories of these different ones and bringing into it the caste and societal struggles, which is kind of intriguing. Anyway, so with the way this is set up, hold on a second here. Well, my chat stopped working, so we're going to pull that up real quick. Just a second. Trying to figure out why chat disappeared. Okay. Chat is unavailable. Okay. Interesting. I guess we're not going to worry about it then. Well, hopefully. All right. Well, I'm just going to leave that up. So, with any luck, if anybody does come into chat and actually is watching this live, I'll see you. Apologies. I just got a little thing. He said the chat had stopped working, so I was going to check on that. So anyway. So if you want me at some point to go through and do a history series on a bunch of this stuff and look at the ins and outs of the different parts and pieces to it, I'll be happy to do that. But I'm getting way off on a tangent here. And I want to go back into why I actually got into this today. So, looking at each one of these, we're going to come back to our race in a second. We're first going to jump over into the classes. And the reason being because a lot of people are struggling with what class to pick. Race is something that is, for a lot of these, it's more bonuses and more flavor of what kind of character you want to play. But the biggest thing people are struggling with is what kind of character, what class, what job, what type of character do they want to be. So we're just going to break it down right down through. We're going to look at your different kinds of characters, and we'll go from there to ones that you might want to consider, especially as a new player, ones that you may want to consider as a more advanced player, ones that if you've never played, you might want to give your first shot, ones that if you're feeling adventurous, you might want to jump into if you really want to learn a lot about how it's done, different parts and pieces. So right off the bat, one of the easiest characters to jump in and play is a barbarian, because you are just a straight up fighter. You are a rage monster. The whole point to a barbarian is that you are a frontline tank. You are a damage sponge. Basically, the whole point is that you go out, you rage, and when you rage, you take less damage from any incoming attacks, and you do more damage to the enemies. So you rage, you run into the fray, you charge into the front line, and you just start swinging your axe or sword or whatever it happens to be that you've got in hand, and you bash the enemies. Just about as straightforward as you can make it. Fighter is a slightly more nuanced version of that. You are still commonly a frontline character. You are still a melee or hand-to-hand type, in close, more often than not, character. You usually have a bit more skill and or nuance to the characters. The difference that you get with these, when you are a fighter, you are usually wearing armor, and you may or may not have a shield for part of your protection. With a barbarian, your protection is your skin. You are a big, beefy boy. Yeah. Or you can be a smaller, beefy boy or a smaller, beefy girl. I want to see that. Doing the kaboom. There we go. I would like to rage. No, anyway. So, as a barbarian, you yourself are the biggest part of the weapon because there are barbarians that do, like you can see, she's got a big old axe on her back there. That battle axe, or possibly even double axe, depending on which way they've got it, looks like a battle axe, is going to cleave through a bunch of people because if she rages out, she's just swinging that more or less with little to no thought about anything except for cleaving through the enemies. She's not worried about her own health and safety. She's just how many, goblins, kobolds, gnolls, whatever, can I split my axe through? So there's the big difference between the barbarian and the fighter. The fighter is usually considered a bit more strategic. The fighter has some bonus skills. They have things like second wind and action surge and stuff like that that give them additional attacks. They're also commonly wearing armor. Fighters are the ones that usually get to the point where they're wearing some heavy armor. You might find them also with a shield. So you'll have like a hammer and shield or sword and shield, and you'll have that kind of thing. Paladins also do shields, and we'll get into them in a little bit here. But the fighters are the more skilled side from the barbarians. You also have in that same front line, commonly at least, is paladins. And same kind of thing. Clunk. Paladins are basically the quote-unquote holy warrior version of a fighter. So your knight in shining armor is usually a paladin's type character. They are also, they're strength-based. So your fighter and your barbarian are both strength-based. You usually end up with a higher constitution as your secondary. You might have a decent dex bonus or a decent secondary bonus besides that, but your strength and constitution are your big stats. Where it starts to move over a little bit with the paladin is, while strength is still your primary stat, because you can also cast some spells, there are different spell abilities that paladins can do to heal and help with some control on the battlefield, like things like lay on hands, do some secondary healing radiance, so it heals themselves and other, like your allies can regain healing while being there. Divine sense, they get advantage on celestials, fiends, and the undead. So quote unquote abomination type characters are what the paladins are searching to find and eliminate. So hence why they're that kind of fighter. So you're getting into a bit more nuanced part of that. It's still frontline fighting, but it's frontline fighting that has more nuance to it. Paladins are actually kind of second line because normally you have your fighter and your barbarian on the front line. Paladin can be a secondary front line, but commonly they'll be the second in line right behind these guys, buffing the rest of the party, these guys included, to help aid in, how that works. You'll even see later on where like the cleric, same kind of thing. While clerics, wisdom is their main stat because, again, they are spellcasters. They are a divine spellcasting race, much like the paladins. Druids are as well. We'll get to them in just a second. Wisdom is commonly their primary stat because the biggest thing, again, is that they are spellcasters. But strength is a common second one for them. And then tertiary, you can see constitution. The reason being because, again, you're wielding a warhammer or a mace or some large melee weapon, or large melee damage, I should say, to go along with it. So they are, again, your second line. There to help buff and control and heal. So like you got the resistance to help with saving throws, guidance to help with ability checks. Sacred Flame is a secondary ranged attack. So the clerics are a bit more nuanced, yet again, like the paladins are, but they are again a tough, traditionally melee fighter with heavier armor and shields, and they are again a tank type character. Where you step away from that fighter, barbarian, paladin, cleric, heavier hitters, melee type, and get into a bit more of the nuance is with our next set. So, excuse me. Our next set, you still have a frontline fighter in a monk. While a monk is going to have dexterity as their main. You'll have Constitution and Wisdom as secondaries, and we'll get into why here in a little bit. But the monk will have Dexterity as their main because their biggest thing is their agility, their reflexes, how fast they can attack, how many attacks they can do in once. And a lot of that comes from unarmed strikes. Because of the way that they fight, their dexterity being so high allows them to dodge damage instead of wearing heavy armor to take the damage and to mitigate that impact. They commonly will wear no armor. They will wear either just robes or they will wear light armor depending on what kind of fighting style you get into. But what you can do is you can crank up their dexterity, and there's some skills and some different martial prowess things later on that make it even harder to hit them. And they'll also get 14 different attacks, different kinds of attacks, but then they can use flurry of blows and attack again, and they're actually a pretty cool class as well. So they're more or less a frontline fighter, but they're not there to soak the damage. They're there to do a bunch of damage themselves, but avoid getting hit. So they're kind of a secondary fighter as well. They're more in this paladin cleric line of the second line, because again, your barbarian or your fighter, you're your main tank, they're your front line. There are ways around all of this, because the next one we're going to look at, if we're doing our secondary things, is the druid. The druid is also technically considered a divine spellcaster. They are not a traditional spellcaster, which is the ones we'll get into here in the bottom. So a druid, again, wisdom based, higher dex and con to keep them, going. Charisma being a little higher makes sense, I guess, for this one. Charisma, intelligence, strength is really more or less with this kind of character is flavor. It depends. Do you want to have a higher carry weight? You would do more strength. You want to be better with the actual speech checks? That's where the charisma comes in. And the dex and the con being split as a secondary, not a bad choice. But wisdom is where the spell casting power for a druid comes in. You can also get some different skills later on so that your weapons and things come off of your wisdom stat instead of your dex and your strength stats. So that also makes sense. Druids, because of the wild shape possibilities, where they can change into different animals, can also be a secondary tank. Because if you put a bear on the front line, they can soak up a lot of damage. And what ends up happening with the druids is if they're a bear and they run in and they do a whole bunch of damage and then they take a bunch of damage, what happens with that is they will lose their bear form and go back to being their humanoid, whether that be elf or human or whatever it happens to be, form after the bear has taken enough damage to lose that form. Depending on how they do it, and wild shape and things like that are different, and because you have polymorph and wild shape and different ways to change your appearance versus what you actually are. So that gets into more advanced, nuanced stuff later on down the road. But a druid can also be a secondary tank. The other thing that you've got to remember with this too is that a druid, cleric, and paladin are all healers. Your clerics are considered your primary healer. You know, ta-da! Even if a cleric is, do they have it in here? Cantrips, domain. There we go. So, trickery domain is what any of you who watch Critical Role, that was what Jester was. She was a trickster domain. The trickery domain, I believe, is also what in here. Where is she? Shadowheart. Custom. Yep. Trickery domain. So basically, this is like it's showing what the different ones are that are in here. She's a high half elf. And so it's giving all the parts and pieces for these. That might actually not be a bad idea to show you from these. I'll get back into that in a minute. Anyway, so the domains that they come from is a whole different thing. And much like the schools for the bards and stuff like that, it makes a big difference as far as what you do with them. But that's a whole different story. Again, more nuanced, more advanced things for later on. I just wanted to go through and give you basics on what the classes were this time around. I'll do another stream in the not too distant future talking about ones that you may want to consider for multi-classing and for if you're looking for a bit more adventure versus just being a noob. So, as I was saying before, even if you pick a different domain besides your life domain, your light domain, any of the different ones that are in here, there are many different possibilities for how you can go through and do these. Even if you are the least healer of the healers, you're still a cleric. So when it comes right down to it, clerics are considered the healers of the group. Paladins and druids both also have healing magic, and they're considered secondary healers. Interestingly enough, people commonly forget rangers also have some healing spells. It is... I don't think you actually get... No, not off the bat. So, not initially at least. You don't have the... Whoops. Like they do have, cantrips that you got in here that you can go through and change what the different parts and pieces are. But your cantrips are basically your spells that don't take a spell slot. They're the ones that you can cast over and over again. I think it actually changes. Yep, Find Familiar, Urban Tracker, Wasteland Wanderer, yep, resistance to cold, fire, and poison. Yeah. So, like it says, natural explorers, they go out searching through whatever it happens to be, and you gain an additional spell and or part and piece with that for what it is. So, Beast Tamer Wandering the Woods. So, later on for the Rangers, you also gain, as I believe it actually shows, yes, under Wisdom. So clerics, druids, and rangers, their spells are cast from the Wisdom stat, which is why your dex is your highest, because your attacking and things like that come from your dex. Your spells and your abilities come from Wisdom. Constitution makes sense. Strength, I guess. I would probably have swapped Charisma and Strength as the main character because, again, you want your speech checks to go through. See, the hard part with a lot of these is picking a good mixture of stats. So your barbarians, your fighters, your paladins, strength is your primary, pretty straightforward and simple. Your cleric, your druid, and your ranger, your spell casting comes from your wisdom, but the ranger's damage abilities come from their dex. So you have to have a high wisdom, but it's probably not going to be your highest because you're not a primary spellcaster. Your bard, sorcerer, Gweep, warlock, was that? What'd you say? Gosh. So the Bard, Sorcerer, and Warlock are all charisma based. So the Warlock and the Sorcerer, their spells come directly from it. Same thing with the Bard, because people don't realize Bards are spellcasters. Yes, they also do, obviously, Bardic Inspiration. They're literally the only ones in here going to be using, musical instruments and doing things like, Bardic Inspiration, which adds a bonus. Kind of like when you saw, I think Cleric has it. Guidance, there it is. So, yeah, Divination Cantrip. It helps add a bonus to ability checks. So when you're doing your, for anybody who's played as of yet or has seen somebody playing, when you see those ability checks where somebody's got a die sitting, there's a D20 sitting in the middle of the screen, and it comes up and you click on it and it rolls. Down below that, there's a spot that says bonuses. One of the available bonuses in there, if you have somebody in your party with guidance, is just that, guidance. You can add another D4 roll, or four-sided die roll, to that. Well, bards have Bardic Inspiration. You can inspire an ally with a D6 bonus to their next attack, ability check, or saving throw. So they're adding an even bigger bonus to those. So not a bad thing, again, to have in your party. Kind of a neat little bonus when it goes along with it, too. Oh, excuse me. But bards are harder to play. So we're going to, and again, I'm going to get into, for new players, what some of the better or worse ones to play are. And then finally, the only one I haven't clicked on as of yet is Rogue. I love that little dancing coin thing. Poof, and it's gone. Where'd your coin go? Anyway, so rogues are great. They are one of two, the other one being the ranger. No, monks too. Yeah, monk, ranger, and rogue are all dexterity primary. Your ranger, like I was saying, is a secondary healer. They're also a ranged fighter. Later on with the ranger too, you can also do what they call two-weapon fighting. You have to kind of pick between your styles. Either you're a bow and arrow distance fighter, or you're a two-weapon fighter where you've got a blade in each hand, or an axe in one hand and a hammer in the other. But you're dual wielding. Rogues can also dual wield. You have two light weapons, one in each hand, or again, you can also do bow and arrow. So, excuse me. But the biggest thing that rogues have is that they have their sneak attack ability. So not only do they have the the sleight of hand is one of their biggest skills, because their sleight of hand is how you quite commonly will unlock locked chests and locked doors. And their stealth ability is how you can sneak into a room and take something without any of the NPCs or the other characters in the game noticing that you're there. A rogue is pretty essential to most parties. You already have one in the players, or in the party characters that are in the other part of it. Again, I'll get into party makeup in a little bit. So the last one, like I said, Sorcerer and Warlock are two of your spellcasters. Kapoof. Boosh. They are both charisma-based spellcasters. Charisma-based for this game because a lot of your speech checks are based upon charisma. Interestingly enough, the price of your things that you buy and sell is based on charisma. Your spellcasting for, well, you can see it right there, bards, paladins, sorcerers, warlocks, and also influences traders' prices. It does make it for some of these speech checks easier. However, I've noticed that a bunch of the speech checks are also based off of wisdom or intelligence for insight, perception, deception, persuasion. Persuasion comes off of charisma, but your insight is, you know, your perception rather comes off of your wisdom. Your insight is off of your intelligence. So it's intriguing because there's only one class in the game that has intelligence as a primary stat, and that's your wizards. And everybody else, we got strength, charisma, wisdom, dexterity, strength, dexterity, strength, dexterity, charisma, intelligence. And the wizards are the only character class that has intelligence as their primary stat. Oh, that's good coffee. Top of the morning. Okay. So you'll also notice too, like daggers, quarterstaffs, light crossbows, spears, pikes, halberds, and glaives. Except for the dagger, the intriguing thing about that is that all of those are keep people at a distance weapons. I always thought that was kind of interesting, that your quarterstaff, spear, pike, halberd, and glaive are all two-handed distance weapons. I know the quarterstaff and I think the spear can both be, let's see. Doesn't actually say, I don't think. Let's see if we can. No, it doesn't. No. I know the quarterstaffs are what they call a versatile weapon, so they can be used one-handed or two-handed. I think spears might also be. I know that pikes, halberds, glaives, those are, I'm pretty darn sure, only two-handed weapons. And then, of course, your light crossbow, which is a two-handed ranged. Dagger, like I said, is the only in close for any of those, which, not bad to keep on hand. I'm fairly certain every character class has a weapon proficiency of a dagger, while it is a rogue's favorite because you can put one in each hand and get it in close and stab. Yeah, dagger. Again, for any Critical Role fans, dagger. The intriguing thing with that is that your intelligence stat, memory and mental power improves spellcasting for wizards. It is also what your ability checks for things like investigation are based upon your intelligence stat. But wizard is the only one that has it as their primary. You will see it's intriguing. Rogue also has it as a semi-important, your intelligence and your wisdom. Even though they're not, you can, I'll preface this by saying, you can be an arcane trickster, which is a subclass later on for a rogue that lets them add some spellcasting ability. But by default, when you start out, a rogue is not a spellcaster. In fact, the intriguing thing with that, too, is that there's also the ability for the rogue to be a thief or an assassin in this setup. So you can go through the whole thing without casting a single spell as a character. Obviously, this is the same thing with the barbarian and the fighter. So I thought it was interesting the way they laid these out, too, because traditionally, these three, your barbarian, your fighter, and your rogue, are usually not your spellcasting characters. Intriguingly enough with that, the fighter and the rogue both have the ability to add some arcane to them. Your sorcerer, warlock, and wizard are all traditionally spellcasting. Your druid and cleric, divine spellcasting, versus your arcane, which is what these are down here. Bard, also again, spellcasting. The intriguing thing with Bard is while they are an arcane spellcaster, they use charisma like the sorcerer and the wizard do, or the sorcerer and the warlock do, rather. Ta-da! But they're considered closer to the cleric and druid side, which I'm not quite sure why that is. But anyway, a whole different story again, because they're a very secondary, nuanced character. And then you have your monk, which doesn't have spells, but has some cool abilities that could be spells, instead, because they've got things like later on with their flurry of blows, they can stunning strike and literally stun a creature until the next round. They can, again, I don't want to get into any of the more advanced things because I'll just confuse people, but the short version on this is that there are a lot more nuanced parts and pieces to these other than just what you see initially. Even the barbarian, kaboo, your big old rage monsters are not necessarily just a bad thing there, go hit it. There is more nuance to it, especially as you go up in levels. The higher you go in the level, the more nuance you can add. So it is intriguing. Excuse me. So it becomes an interesting side piece to it. What comes down to any of this is figuring out what kind of character you want to have. Are you looking to play this where you rush in, bash heads, split down the middle of anything getting in your way with your big old axe and call it a day? Or do you want to stand on that front line, pull your sword out, and direct the way the fight's going to go a little bit more nuanced? Do you want to sneak into the shadows? And before your enemy even knows you're there, have an arrow or a pair of blades in their back? Do you want to take the inherent magic power that you've got inside you and overwhelm your enemies with damage? Not in the front lines, in the middle of the pack or even the back of it. Then you got sorcerer, warlock, and wizard for that. Do you want to be there for protection? Not only can you heal, but you've also got your armor and your shield and your hammer or axe or whatever weapon you choose to do the weapons with or the damage with that keeps you between the squishies and the ones who are taken on the front. Then you got your paladin and your cleric. And your druid, which again is a secondary. They can be a secondary tank. They can be the big old bear up front. They can be a healing and or damage dealing spellcaster. They are a very nuanced character, and in upper levels a very powerful one. Then you got your bard, dancing around in the middle of the party, casting spells that are going to confound and confuse the enemy and aid your allies. And if they need to, they can go stabby stabby as well. Or fire an arrow from the back after they, put their flute away. Obviously, your cleric, major source of healing. But they also have, like I was saying before, so many other domains. The trickster domain. Blessing of the trickster. Advantage on stealth checks. You don't usually think of stealth as being one of those things that a cleric has. Domain shared by wicked, chaotic, and mischievous deities alike. Those who channel trickery specialize in deception and illusion magic. So charm person, disguise self, it's not what you usually think of with a cleric. Interestingly enough, that cleric still has a bunch of healing spells, but they also have things like Blessing of the Trickster, disguise self, charm person, knowledge domain, adaptable and adroit in all manner of languages and skills. Your mind is an intellectual cup brimming with exquisite knowing. Command and sleep. Not the ones that I would put together with knowledge domain. I would think things like, speak with animals or, tongues or things like that. War domain, you're a war priest. You have, war priest charge, warcaster, divine favor, shield of faith, parts and pieces of that. Tempest domain, faith has made you the very thunder that quakes the black firmament. The lightning courses through the veins of a terrible storm. It really changes what kind of character for some of these subclasses as well. So, life domain, just like it sounds, an aspect of many good deities offering spells that protect and restore the mind, body, and soul. You are a healer. You are a primary healer. That is the whole point for you to be there. You are there to make sure that your entire party is got their health topped up, is not, hit with any kind of poison or slowed or any of the negative aspects or effects that they can get from other spellcasters. Light domain, same idea. You got, like there's light, fairy fire, burning hands, warding flare. Yeah, so this one is another one of those ones, like the biggest thing is that they are just pushing back the darkness and like they are massively against undead and necromancy and things like that. And nature, just like it sounds. You embody the vast viridian power of the natural world, an avatar of the subtle divinity of fruitfall, avian migration, woodland silence, and the landslide's roaring fury. The short version of this is that it makes a difference what kind of character you want to play. And that's the reason why I got into the subclasses here, is because figuring out what kind of character you want to be is the first step in figuring out what class you're going to play. So are you a frontline, middle, or backline character? Do you want to rush into the fray, axe, sword, whatever in hand, and just bash heads? If you do, barbarian, fighter, and paladin are going to be your best choices. Okay? If you want to be in the middle of the pack, that gives you a much wider array, because your druid, cleric, ranger, monk, and bard are all middle of the pack. Your backline guys are your sorcerer, warlock, and wizard. Now, having said that, all of those parts and pieces can be interchanged depending on how nuanced you want to get with some of these. Like with that cleric, those subclasses change where in the line you fight and how you fight and if you fight. Because if you are a life domain, chances are the only reason you're fighting is because something got too close to you. Because other than that, you're going to be running around in the middle of the pack healing everybody else that's already getting damage. Or stopping them from taking the damage, whatever it happens to be. You may have also noticed that I didn't show you rogue. The reason being because rogue is kind of their own classification. Because again, the biggest bonus that rogues have are two things. Those sneak attacks is that extra bonus damage. That extra damage goes up as the rogue levels up. So by the time you get to be a level 10, 12, higher level rogue, that 1d6 is now 4d6, 5d6, 6d6. It is just a handful of dice that you are tossing out there whenever you surprise an enemy or you have advantage against that enemy for some reason. It can be a crap load of damage. The other big thing that rogues do, again, is out of combat. They are the sleight of hand and stealth masters. So they can be used in so many different utilities. They're very versatile characters. In my humble opinion, if you are brand new to the game, you have two different possibilities for what kind of character you're going to play. You can be either a solo leader or you can be a party player. So here's what I mean by that. Back to our origin. You already know that at some point you are going to run into Asterion, who is a rogue, Lysel, who is a fighter, Gale, who is a wizard, Shadowheart, who is a cleric, Will, who is a warlock, Karlach, who is a barbarian, and the Dark Urge, who is a sorcerer. So, these different origin characters are all ones, as far as I know, because the Dark Urge is new to me. I will be fully honest with that one. I have not, as of yet, seen this. It's pretty awesome. The background is a little frightening. Haunted one. A wicked moment, person or thing that cannot be slain by sword or spell haunts your mind and flickers in your peripheral vision. You carry it wherever your adventure takes you, or perhaps it carries you. It's just scary. I mean, the little bit I've seen on this, because I try and avoid spoilers with any of these things, this is creepy. It's like you're trying to figure out if this is a demonic possession or if it is like a psychosis. Like if there's something, a split personality kind of, internal evil twin kind of thing. So that one's intriguing to me. But the point being that if you want to play your character as a party leader, you know that you have a rogue, fighter, wizard, cleric, warlock, and barbarian, at the very least. Again, I'm not positive on the Dark Urge. Haven't seen it as of yet, but we're gonna find out. At least so far in the Act 1 that I've played through, I have not run into this character yet. I don't know if that means I won't, because again, I'm not sure if that's because they're an origin character only, or if it's something that I can run into in the world. When I find out, I will let you know. But knowing that you have all these ones at your disposal, you can gear your character to fit into this party. So you have a party of 4. If you plan on playing by yourself, you're not playing this multiplayer with other friends, you have your character plus 3 at any point in time in your party. So if you wanted to have Karlach the Barbarian as your frontline damage tank, or Lysel as your frontline damage tank, even later on, Shadowheart and Will can both be, shielded fighters. Shadowheart's a heck of a lot better at it than Will is, but we'll get there later on. So your primary frontline damage tanks are available. You've got Gale and Will are two damage dealers. And you got a wizard and a warlock that are both DPS. They do a fair amount of magic damage dealing. Shadowheart is kind of the halfway in between. She's not quite the frontline tank. She's not quite the secondary damage dealer. But she's good at both of those things. Not great like the other ones are. So your Lae'zel and Karlach are great at your frontline tanking and still doing a bunch of melee damage. Gale and Will are great at being backline damage from a distance with their spells and their Eldritch Blasts. Astarion is your sneaker, and he sneaks up into places, gets the first strike on different things from the shadows, and he's the one who disarms your traps and unlocks your locked doors and unlocks your locked crates. So essentially what you're doing with any of these, unless you intend to be a rogue or a rogue-like character that has a high dex and a high sleight of hand skill, then Astarion will be in your party. Okay? Because your possibilities, when you're in here, you can be a rogue yourself. You can be a cleric that has sleight of hand as a skill. Or you can be a bard, rather, that has sleight of hand as a skill. You can be a ranger that has sleight of hand and stealth. But the rogues are the best at it. That's why it has the ×2. Because, plain and simple, they are the best at sleight of hand and stealth. So, you have a couple different options. Either you can be a rogue yourself, and if you're going to be a rogue, you don't need Astarion because you'll be the rogue. Or you're going to have Astarion in your party. You can get away with not having a rogue and not being a rogue in one of two scenarios. Either one, you don't care about opening every chest and every locked door. That is entirely up to you. If you don't care about that, that's okay. You can get through the game without having to open every single locked door and chest and whatever else. Some doors can even be bashed down by a barbarian or a fighter, so it's possible to get past them as well. Some chests, same thing, you can bash them open. Be careful with that, though, because if they are trapped and you bash them open, you set off the trap. So, especially with your first playthrough, there's going to be a lot of things that are in locked chests that you're going to want to get into. There's going to be a lot of things behind locked doors that you're going to want to get into. So I would recommend either having Astarion in your party or being a rogue yourself. Okay? With that in mind, so your party composition so far is Astarion and you and two others, which usually are going to be a tank of some kind and a secondary damage dealer or healer. That's going to depend on what kind of character you are. So are you the frontline tank? Are you the secondary damage dealer? Are you the healer? Are you trying to be a halfway point for any of these? So if you don't want to specialize in one thing, all you need to do is make sure that your party consists of a good mix of those things that are needed. You need somebody to soak damage in some form, whether that be a fighter that has heavy armor and can be just bashed on because their armor makes it so they either don't get hit or the armor takes the damage. Or they need to be a barbarian that can just take that damage and shrug it off because they are, again, just a meat shield. Or have heavy armor and take that damage, but also be able to heal. You know, whether that they be healing themselves, healing the party members, whatever it happens to be, but soaking up part of that damage. Or for you, it could be avoiding the damage. Like I was saying before, if you are a cleric, or not a cleric, but if you are a custom character here, if you are a monk or a ranger or a rogue, your dexterity is ridiculously high, so you can avoid even getting hit. Unless, of course, it's an area of effect spell, but rogues even have a cool thing for that too, but that's a whole later on kind of thing. So when it comes right down to it, what I'm going to recommend for you is figure out who's going to be in your party. Because you run into Shadowheart, Lae'zel, Astarion, and Gale right from the beginning of the game. So you've got those 4 right there. You run into Will very early on because he's in the first grove. Sorry, spoiler alert. I should have said that ahead of time. You run into him as the Blade of Frontiers in the first Druid Grove you come to. So again, very early on. Karlach, again, spoilers, Will is trying to find Karlach. And so you do run into her a little bit later, but it's still in Act 1. It's still a relatively early on acquisition, so it's not like you're going too far into there without finding her. But these 4 are right off the bat. So you've got a rogue, fighter, wizard, and cleric that you have access to essentially right from the beginning of the game. So what it comes down to is, with starting your party off, if you are brand new to this, you've never played before, you don't know what else you want to do, look at these 4 as being your primary party. You've got your rogue, your frontline fighter, your backline DPS, and your middle of the party that is going to be either being a secondary tank and or healing when anybody else takes damage. Okay? Your party can only be 4 people. So which of these 4 do you want to take the place of in your party? Do you want to be the secondary support? Do you want to be the backline DPS? Damage per second, high damage dealer. Do you want to be that frontline fighter? Or do you want to be the sneaky quick boy in the shadows? That's my recommendation for you for trying to figure out what you want to start off the game as, is which of those 4 main attributes, which of those 4 main pieces do you want to be you going into that party? Okay? Now, all of this, of course, changes if you're playing with friends and you're doing a multiplayer and the 4 of you are making up your own party. Then you can all decide who's going to play what. No big deal one way or the other. So if you're going to be Astarion, my recommendation is to either play as a rogue, or if you want to do it, you can play as a bard or a ranger with a very high sleight of hand and stealth proficiency. So you got to make sure that your dex is high and all the parts and pieces that go with it. So you can do it. You can probably do it as monk has sleight of hand as well. So you could do that as well for the opening the locks and things like that. But really, if you're not going to have Astarion in your party, you may as well be a rogue, because you're just going to be replacing that character. If you are going to not have Lizelle in there, if you're going to be the front liner, then I recommend you again either play as a fighter or as a barbarian. One of the two. A paladin is not a bad class to play as. They are actually ridiculously strong characters. However, one thing to be aware of with a paladin is they are a bit more nuanced character. The nice thing about a paladin, they do have some built-in healing. So you do have the option of being a secondary healer for your party. They pair very well with a cleric. I've actually seen a fair number of multi-class builds with a cleric and paladin paired together. Not a bad choice, really. The only small thing with that is, over here, you can see the paladin, their main attribute is strength. Their secondary attribute is charisma, because charisma is their modifier for their spells. However, a cleric is based on wisdom. I have also seen cleric, druid, ranger, different multi-classes because they all use wisdom as their primary. Now, if you want to do a paladin that has strength as their primary, charisma as their secondary, and wisdom as their third, you can do that. Problem is, constitution is where you get your hit points from. Your actual health points, your hit points, your HP. So, it's kind of hard to make that a lower thing than your wisdom when the wisdom doesn't do anything for the paladin. The only reason you would take it is if you're planning on multi-classing into a cleric or a druid to go along with that paladin. Paladins are also a little tough because you do need to remember you have to take an oath. And if you break that oath, you become an oath breaker paladin. And that's a whole different subclass and a whole different way to play. So it gets intriguing. So you've got your barbarian, your fighter, and your paladin are all possibilities. You are just weird looking as a Githyanki. Make you a dwarf. Paladin. Interesting. Or barbarian would be kind of fun too. Shield dwarf. Paladin. What does that look like? Big old hammer on his back. I like it. That'd be fun at some point to play. The other thing to think about with this is this game has, I think if I remember seeing it right, somewhere between, it's like the average of 80 hours plus gameplay. It was like 80 to 100 hours of gameplay for the main story quest. It doesn't even include like all of the extras and things like that. Like, so if you're obviously you're not going to speed run this kind of thing because you want to see all the different parts and pieces. I mean, just going through and picking up every book and scrap of paper and reading all of those and doing all the parts and pieces that go with it, it'll take forever. But anyway, so going back to our beginning, you can always play through this again too. And that's if you're replacing Lizelle. If you're replacing Gale, you basically have being a wizard, like he is, Gweep, a warlock or a sorcerer, you can also be a druid, boom. Or you can be a rogue, because again, high DPS with that sneak attack. You could be a secondary barbarian. Because the entire point, really, to the Gale character, he's there for damage. Gweep. Yeah. Gale is a wizard. Wizards, traditionally, in D&D games, yes, they are all about learning. That's why you actually can go through and learn new spells for a wizard by paying gold and adding it to your spellbook. But the reason why they do that is because wizards are considered what they call glass cannons. They have lower health. They have, they don't traditionally wear armor because it actually can sometimes affect their defense negatively. It can also affect their spellcasting abilities. And it's intriguing how it all works. But when it comes right down to it, traditionally wizards are in the back firing spells that do the most damage of anything out there, and also do things like, make it harder for the enemies to fight you. So they are damage and control characters. Well, let's see right off the bat. So yeah, so there's your Witch Bolt, which does 1d12 lightning every turn. Fog Cloud blinds and obscures creatures within it. Grease makes it so that if the characters that are in it fail a saving check, they fall down. Sleep, just what it sounds like, puts them to sleep. Thunderwave does thunder, force damage, 2d8 force damage to everybody in the Thunderwave range. And then Mage Armor to, as it says, increase armor class to 13 plus the Dex mod. So that's part of the reason why Dex is the third skill in there, because it goes to their Dex modifier for things like Mage Armor or for Shield or things like that. Their armor class, their AC is affected by that. Well, one thing that you'll find as you go through later on, like light armor, most light armor only allows you to have a DC or an AC bonus from your dexterity of +2 at most. If you're not wearing armor, if you're just in a robe, then your dexterity bonus can be +2, +3, whatever it must be. If you're a wizard, chances are your intelligence is your big one. That's your +5, your +3, your +2, or your proficiency bonuses. Your dex is probably going to be a +1 if plus anything. So, again, if you're replacing Dale, chances are the reason you're replacing Dale is because you want to be either a magic user or a damage dealer. It is nice to have a character in your party that has a high intelligence for those skill checks. But when it comes right down to it, the big reason Gale is there is as a damage dealer. So Gale can get swapped out with Will later on. He's a magic user. He's a damage dealer. There he be. Karlach can replace Lae'zel. Or Karlach can replace Gale. Because Karlach does a crap load of damage, as well as soaking up a bunch of damage. The other thing you can do with this, and then obviously you've got Shadowheart. If you want to replace Shadowheart, awesome, go for it. The thing I will tell you is, if you're going to do that, you're going to want to pick one of two things. Either a cleric yourself, or a paladin. Again, all of this is supposing that you are a new player. I would expect if you're watching my video series, one of three things. Either you're a new player and you're just trying to learn more about it. 2, you're a player who's played D&D and or RPG video games and you just want to learn more about this particular game. Or 3, you're just somebody I know and you're watching my videos because you want to be nice. Obviously, the third one doesn't matter for this game. The first one, if you are a noob, all of us at some point have been noobs. It's literally how you get started. You are here to learn. Awesome. I'm here to teach. That's the entire point. So my recommendation when it comes right down to it, again, going back to your party makeup, this is not a game that you can go through solo. You can't go through the game with just yourself. There are games like this where you can go through without a party of any kind. From what I have seen, even on the easiest difficulty, this one is a bit too difficult to be doing that. I could be wrong. It is entirely possible that there's a way that you could go through and do this without having to worry about I like it. It's just crazy watching the tunic. Floof. Excuse me. Oh, and I'm banging the mic, darn it. Yeah. So, even as I'm going through doing these tutorials and I'm talking about the different parts and pieces of this, as I'm watching, in my head, I'm also picking out things that myself I want to play later on. So yes, you do run into at least these characters. I know because these 6 characters in Act 1 I have run into. At some point, it's entirely possible we run into this guy as well. Again, he's new to the thing. I played early access when it was pretty early into the early access. I have not played through this a bunch myself. But what I'm doing right now, as I'm going through making this tutorial series, and then eventually a bunch of gameplay streams with you guys, I'm also thinking about different things I want to play myself with this storyline. I've already created, for me, I've created a paladin character, I've created a bard character, and I've created a monk character. At some point, I'm going to create a cleric, a druid, a rogue. I don't know in total if I'm ever going to get into... I am not a frontline fighter guy. I just never have been. I've never been the barbarian or the fighter kind of guy. I made a monk because I think it'll be fun to have them as a secondary tank that the enemies try and attack but can't hit because the dex is too high. I just think that'll be fun. You know, there's an ability that the monks have. Yeah, unarmored defense adds the wisdom modifier to the armor class, which is even cooler. Dexterous attacks, monks use dexterity instead of strength for their attack modifier. Death strikes, unarmored attacks deal 1 to 4 bludgeoning damage unless the normal damage is higher. So you're always going to do at least 1d4 instead of just usually an unarmed attack. So if you're any other character class, more often than not, an unarmed attack, so just your bare fist, is a 1. You do 1 point of damage. Later on, some barbarians and some fighters, if their strength modifier gets high enough, they can do 2 points of damage. What it's saying with this one is that monks, because they, are particularly monks themselves, they can do 1d4 with an unarmed attack right from the get-go. And it even goes up from there. It's kind of cool. Later on, monks are actually so strong that their fists are considered magic weapons. It's pretty awesome. That's why I made a monk. And bonus unarmed strike after making any attack with a monk weapon, which includes being unarmed, or while unarmed, ta-da, you can make another unarmed attack as a bonus action. So you get an attack, and then you get a bonus action second attack. And again, the later you go, that even goes up. So you get 2 attacks and then a bonus action attack. So 3 attacks. And there's a reason why their thing is called Flurry of Blows. You get key points, which are kind of like the sorcerer points that give you additional actions you can take. And it just looks like a really cool melee class. I've seen somebody play a monk. Again, for any of you Critical Role fans, if you've seen seen Marisha Ray play Beauregard in the campaign 2, that was a pretty awesome thing to see. In campaign 1, Grog runs into Stormbreaker Groon when they're in Vasselheim. He runs into that old man who's a monk who kicks the crap out of Grog, who is their big old beefy barbarian, who is a Goliath. He's a half giant, for goodness sake. And he beats the snot out of him without any problem at all. Now, it's just an intriguing class to me. I want to play one because I've never played one in the game itself. So I made a monk character as well. I made a bard character because I like the jack of all trades aspect of bards. And I made a paladin character because I have not played a paladin since AD&D, which is, I guess, technically 2nd edition. Yeah, it's been a long time, which I think back then was actually still called Cavalier. But anyway, so there's just lots of parts and pieces to this. I will probably eventually go through and play all of them, play a character of each class, because I plan on playing this game for many years to come. Like I did with Neverwinter Nights, like I did with the original Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, like I've done with Shadows of Am. Like there's so many different, the Dragon Age series, tons of RPGs I will go back and play again just to see what kind of nuance I can change with what kind of character I play with them. And because I like changing of how RPGs work, because, it's fun to do. So, that right there would be my time for today. What I'm going to recommend for you, like I said, if you are a brand new player, first thing to figure out, which of these 4 main characters do you want to be? Because with this Origin custom thing, you can start off being one of these characters. You can take their place in the story. You can literally take over for them. I mean, if you want to be the vampire crazy rogue, you can actually proceed as him. You can play as him. If you are completely unsure as to what kind of character you want to play, you can pick any one of the characters that are here and just play as them. If you want to play through as them, you can. You can actually play as that character. You don't need to decide, to go through and customize every part and piece you want. You can play as that character. You can take their origin story and be them. Or you can decide to go through and say, okay, well, I want to be this kind of character. I want to be a strong fighter. I want to be the frontline tank that, I just stand there and any of the damage, I can just soak it up. I can stand in the doorway while these guys all stand behind me and shoot spells over my shoulder into the party that's trying to get through, and I don't let anybody through. All their stuff glances off my armor. I'm going to kick the crap out of anybody who tries to get in my way. I'm going to be the big old beefy fighter class standing here just taking it. Fighting so that's two-handed. Yeah, two-weapon fighting. I love this protection thing that they've got going on that you can actually take as a paladin later on too. You choose your weapon fighting style. So two-weapon fighting, just what it sounds like. You actually have a weapon in each hand. Protection, you impose disadvantage on attacks to any of your allies that are around you. So again, this is why the paladin is great for standing in the middle of a group, because that protection allows you to make it a disadvantage on other people. Great weapon fighting, so when you roll a 1 or a 2 on a damage die for an attack with a two-handed melee weapon, that die is re-rolled once. So you use two-handed weapons and you do even more damage with them. Dueling, you use a one-handed weapon, and that one-handed weapon, you don't have something in your other hand. It allows you to do even more damage with that weapon. And then later on, if you're a duelist, you can actually get a bonus to your AC as though you're holding a shield. So defense, gain a bonus to an armor class while wearing armor, and then archery, gain a bonus to hit with ranged weapons. So, and that's just your fighter right off the bat. And then what are you going to be? Are you a soldier? Kind of makes sense considering what you're playing. And your abilities, again, you've got your strength, constitution. Dex is a good one for the next one down. Wisdom, not bad. You might want to consider moving that wisdom to charisma, again, for those speech checks. And the other reason to do that, too, potentially at least, so these are your three main ones anyway, your strength, constitution, and dex. If the rest of these are all 10, it just means that none of them are negative. There's no actual bonus to that. They're +0. But as long as they're not negative, then you're not negatively impacting any of your other things. If you do want to have an additional bonus in your intelligence, wisdom, or charisma, then yes, put the pluses back in there and take them away from something else. But then you're making something else negative. If all you care about is bashing heads, strength, dex, constitution, have those be your bonuses. And interesting enough, so constitution at 14 gives you a +2. I'll show you. 14, still +2. Dexterity at 12 gives you a +1. I'll show you that again. Strength at 17, which is the highest you can go in your initial character creation, if you use your +2 bonus and you give it a 15, or a 16 rather. So 15 is the highest I can give that. If I make all of these negative as far as they go, and I take away all my bonuses, 15 is the highest that I can give it, and then I can give it a +2, which gives me a +5 to saving throws, +3 to strength, +2 to proficiency. If I give that a +1, it's the exact same. +5, +3, +2. Because my base is still at 15, I'm still adding that 1 to get to 16. Those bonuses don't go up until you have 2 points in that. It's only the even numbers that actually make a difference. Just something to remember. Because if you remember just now when we had these 3 skills in here, this was a 17, this was a 15, and this was a 13. Which means all 3 of them got their +1 and +2, but none of them needed to be that high to get that +1 and +2. It does add some additional things in other parts and pieces, like Constitution. Your HP is literally based on each point. So it's 12, which is my HP. How much damage party members can take before being downed. So, see how it goes 11, 12. I can make it 13 by putting that plus 2 in there, but just a plus 1 is also the same. You know, and my dex can be 15, and everything else can be 8, but that makes everything -1. Which, if you want to max out your physical stats and make all your mental stats low, you want to be just me bash things. Go for it. You know, I'm not gonna. You know, I might actually at some point do this just for the giggles. Go through and just make it crazy and max out all my physical stats. That could be fun. But I'm not actually going to do that, obviously. My point being that with whatever you choose, whichever character you plan to be. So if you are trying right off the bat to find a character to fit into your party, remember again, there are 4 people in your party maximum. So you're going to want to remember what kind of party makeup you want to have. It doesn't actually make a difference if you have the quote-unquote traditional lineup. You most definitely can. There is absolutely nothing wrong with having a traditional party. There's also nothing wrong with saying, you know what? I'm going to go a little crazy and do a completely non-traditional thing. You know, it'd be fun at some point to come in here and be like, okay, I'm going to click randomize 10 times. And we end up with a human ranger. Decent stats for a human ranger. So there you go. That's me. Here I go. Start. You know, and just see what happens. I probably won't make it. Hopefully I muted that in time. I probably wouldn't make it, you know, through Act 1 before I was frustrated with it because it wasn't one that I created, but oh well. It might be fun if somebody wants to see that at some point, just for giggles. But yeah, I mean, really what it comes down to is figuring out what kind of character you want to play. You know, if you want to play a traditional D&D type game, then you're going to have your 4 main, which are your frontliner, your DPSer, your healer / support, and your secondary support / out of combat and utility type character. Those can be mixed and matched. You can combine them. That's kind of what the bard comes down to. Is a bard is kind of a wizard rogue. A paladin is also kind of a fighter cleric. So you have different things that can combine parts and pieces to those. But when it comes right down to it, what I'm going to recommend to you is, if you are struggling to figure out what kind of character you want to be, if you have started playing the game and you get to that second battle after the ship crashes and you're in there and the 3 intellect devourers come running in and they attack you and they wipe out your party right off the bat and you've died there 2 or 3 times, or if you haven't started the game at all and you have no idea what you're going to do, here's my recommendation. If you want to play a fighter type character, pick either Barbarian or paladin. Barbarian is your only thing I need to focus on is running out in front and doing a whole bunch of damage. And I'll use the rest of my party to support and heal me. And then I can use the other characters in the party to control the crowd and to heal myself back up and things like that. Awesome, go for it. You can also, if you want to have more nuance to it, pick the paladin or the fighter as also good damage dealing characters. The paladin also, again, has a bit more of that crowd control, has a bit more defense for your whole party, and is a secondary healer. If you want to do a bit more damage and you want to have a bit more nuance to your character, I love that he's listening to the power. That's kind of funny. Then a warlock might be for you. So warlocks, initially at least, they only use your simple weapons, which I think it actually says, might not even say what those are. So your basic weapons, your short sword, your, I think the rapier's in there, your dagger, your short bow, your light crossbow, hand axe, just your basic, as it says, simple weapons, which changes as well with your different races, but and they can wear light armor, and they're decent at other things, but what you're going to run into with them is that they're traditionally spellcasters. They have a high charisma, so you get better deals with the different traders, both when you're selling and buying things. You also get better bonuses to your rolls for a lot of those speech checks. All good things, trust me. The other nice thing too later on is you can actually take some skills and some talent boosts that will make it so that your damage for your weapon comes from your charisma instead of your strength or dex. The biggest thing for a warlock is to make sure that your charisma is your highest. You still want to be careful with making sure that your constitution and your dex are up there, because they are your armor class and your health points stats, and warlocks can be a little squishy because the best they can do is light armor, and unless you're casting Armor of Agathis every time you get into a battle, which, just so you're aware, warlocks only get a couple of spell slots. They have the lowest number of spell slots for any of the casters. So your secondary thing that you've got, your main damage dealer is going to be your Eldritch Blast, which is your main action cantrip that you get. You always have available. And pretty cool anyway. And you also have Blade Ward, which makes it so you take half damage from, like it says, bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing, so your standard weapon attacks. Making it a little easier for you to actually take and deal some damage. Plus you have spells to help back all that up. That Eldritch Blast, yet again, is your main damage, as well as it's your main thing. Later on, you can take different packs. So your subclass is who you have a deal with. So the Fiend. Warlocks in service to fiends work towards corrupting, destructive ends, intentionally or otherwise, and receive hellish blessings in turn. So that Armor of Agathis I was talking about, you gain some hit points, you deal cold damage to anybody that hits you with melee, And you also get the Arms of Hadar, which is creepy. So, on a save, targets still take half damage to this. What you're doing is you're putting out essentially necrotic tentacles. Yeah, it's weird. And then your subclass is the Dark One's Blessing. When you reduce a hostile creature to 0 hit points, this gift from your patron grants you temporary hit points. So essentially, when you kill enemies, you get bonus temporary hit points. Yeah, this is what will is in the game. So the next one over, Warlocks bound to an eldritch being in the far realm work towards inscrutable goals, gaining strange powers over entropy and the mind. So start off with Dissonant Whispers, does psychic damage at range, so it's not a bad little extra bonus, and Hideous Laughter. Again, you're doing damage to their brain. You're both of these. This one is you basically make them curl up into a ball on the ground and laugh for up to 10 turns without being able to do anything. Which is creepy. And then this one does, psychic damage. You're damaging their mind, and you're frightening them so they are so scared of you they can't even move. Mortal Reminder, when you land a critical hit against a creature, that creature and any nearby enemies must succeed a wisdom saving throw or become frightened until the end of your turn, or end of their next turn. So the Mortal Reminder essentially with this is every time you crit, the creatures around you when you crit are scared of you. They're like, oh God, he's going to kill us. And they're literally frightened of you. Okay. Then the Archfey. Graced by a lady or lord of the Fey, you are imbued with all the sumptuous and scary qualities of your patron's extraordinary realm. Fairy Fire. Advantage on attack rolls, and if something is invisible, you can now see it. It's a ranged spell. And Sleep. You put up to 24 hit points of creatures to sleep. If they can be put to sleep, because, much like we were looking at earlier with your elves and your half-elves, they're immune to magical sleep. So keep that in mind. And your actions, Fey Presence. Charm or frighten nearby foes with the Feywild's beguiling, disturbing magics. So for 2 turns, let me hit the T here real quick so we can actually see this. Charmed and frightened. So they can attack the spellcaster. The spellcaster has advantage on charisma checks in dialogue. And cannot move. Frightened entities also have disadvantage on ability checks and attack rolls. So essentially, the one gives us advantage and them disadvantage with the second one. Intriguing. Makes you kind of wonder if you did this right before you went into a dialogue check with a major deal, what would happen. But yeah. And that, again, comes down to your playing style. Do you want to... The Fiend is like a devil or a pit fiend, one of the demons and devils and from the pit or the 9 hells is your patron. They're the ones granting you your power, because that's what the warlock subclass is something is granting you power. You get the same thing from oh goodness. Your clerics, those domains are what kind of domain you're under, but what deity is actually granting you that power is part of that too. So, like Lady of Silver, I believe it's Saloon. I'm not entirely positive because I've only seen it written. I've never heard it pronounced, and I didn't, unfortunately, put it into something to pronounce it for me ahead of time. But Saloon makes the most sense to me as far as the way the deity is set up kind of like the old, two doors swinging to open up into the barkeep, saloon. It looks like saloon, especially with the accent over the U. The Lady of Silver presides over the moon, stars, and navigation. Her power over the heavens is constantly challenged by her sister, Shar, who seeks to plunge the world into eternal shadow. Okay, so Saloon is the moon goddess, silver moon goddess. Let's see, is Shar even in here? Nope. So her sister, Shar, you can't actually pick, which is intriguing because one of the characters in the party is a devotee of Shar. So, Bahamut, angel of the seven heavens, is the dragon god of justice. His ideals of mercy and just authority keep him locked in an inexorable rivalry with his sister, Tiamat. Tiamat, I'm pretty positive you can take. Yep, there she is. Tiamat the Many-Maud is a roiling mass of avarice and hate, currently trapped within the nine hells. Remember I was just talking about them? The dragon god of greed eternally plots her escape, as do her many fanatics in the world of Toril. Yeah, we've actually seen a dark paladin of Tiamat back in that same Critical Role show that was played by Joe Manganiello. So yeah, in each of these, it makes a difference as far as what deity you actually worship. Not because of anything having to do with your powers. I'm pretty sure none of these actually change. Yeah, none of these actually change your power set. It doesn't change anything with any of this stuff. Because I can click through and none of these, your cantrips don't change, your stats don't change, your domain doesn't change what other parts and pieces you got going on here. But be aware that it will likely change different interactions. Like if you choose Saloon, you have a party member who is a worshiper of Shar. You're probably not going to get along. Lolth, the much reviled matriarch of the Drow pantheon. Lolth holds sway over spiders, the Underdark, and the wicked creatures of the Demon Web pits. Her primary goal is to corrupt all Drow, transforming them into heartless cultists. She's an evil god. So if you worship what is traditionally, what do they call them, betrayer gods, the evil ones, you're probably not going to get the best reaction from somebody who worships a god of light. Like Tyr, the blind god, rules over law and justice, encouraging valiant acts from his followers and relentlessly pursuing oath breakers. So that one would go in direct competition to your Oathbreaker paladins. So if you have the Oath of Devotion, following the ideal of the knight in shining armor, you act with honor and virtue to protect the weak and pursue the greater good. Oath of Vengeance, you set aside even your own purity to right wrongs and deliver justice to those who have committed the most grievous sins. An Oath of Ancients, you fight on the side of light in the cosmic struggle against darkness to preserve the sanctity of life and the beauty of nature. It's a lovely sentiment, it really is. But it's a little intriguing because the Oath of Ancients, on the side of light in the cosmic struggle against darkness to preserve the sanctity of life and the beauty of nature. Cool. That means basically you're a paladin that has the same ideals as a druid, more or less. Okay. So I'm getting way off on tangents. I know. I'm just going through and reading a bunch of this stuff. It just intrigues me the amount of nuance that they put into this, because a lot of times how many times have you played up an RPG where you pull it up? There are, 4, maybe 6 possibilities for what kind of character you can play. It might even be only 3. You get your fighter character, your mage character, or your quote unquote ranged character. So you get either somebody who can walk in with an axe or a sword and shield, stand back with a staff and fire spells, or somebody who can switch between a dagger and a bow and arrow. And those are the only 3 choices you have in the entire RPG. The entire battle is decided by one of those 3. This gives you, right from the jump, you got 12 different classes that you can choose from. Many of them have subclasses. Some of them have multiple subclasses, with even more choices for nuance about the different parts and pieces of your character. And then you got, obviously on top of that, you got your backgrounds, not even to mention the fact that the races, you've got 11 different races. Elf, subrace, 2 of them. Tiefling, subrace, 3 of them. Drow, subrace, 2 of them. Each of these different ones that you've got going through here, I think, human and Githyanki, just to double check. Yes, so human, Githyanki, and half-orc are the only 3 that don't have a subclass to them. All the rest of them have subrace, have a subrace to them. Okay? Meaning that you have another dozen choices on top of, all the other choices you have in here. It is nuts. You have 11 races. In your Dragonborn alone, you have 10 subraces. Come on. There are so many choices. This is why I'm not surprised that people are getting just either confused, daunted, or blown away in the actual character creation side of things. So, again, that's why I was making the recommendations I was making. So, if you were going to play a frontliner, if you're going to play a wade into the fight fighter, barbarian or paladin are my recommendations for that. If you want to play, again, this is all for newbie, and if you are new to the game and or new to D&D or new to RPGs, these are my recommendations. If you are going to play a more damage-based versus the simplicity of being a fighter-based, warlock. Because you're still able to do a bunch of the hand-to-hand side of things, but you're more of a magic character who has some hand-to-hand. Okay? If you are looking to have as much utility as possible, it's kind of a toss-up between the rogue and the warlock. The warlock has the bonus of having that high charisma right off the bat, so your speech checks are going to have that bonus to them to begin with. However, rogue has that ability, like I was saying before, with your sleight of hand and with your stealth, you're already getting a major bonus from that. Your dex is ridiculously high, so your armor class is really high. You're going to be hit less often. You're going to do more damage with your sneak attacks. You can spread out your other parts and pieces here with your con, your intelligence, your wisdom. So you can put more points into your charisma if you wanted to have higher with those. It is not uncommon for a rogue to have a lower constitution and a higher charisma. It is also not uncommon for you to go through and spread these out a bit. Like I was saying before, if you look, you only get those +1s and +2 bonuses for your proficiencies. So this one, notice how the bonus doesn't change? +1 to intelligence checks, +3 to saving throws, +1 to intelligence, 2 to proficiency. Drop it down to a 12. 1, 3, 1, 2. It's exactly the same. The bonus here gives you a proficiency to it, which is good. But if all you really care about is that bonus, it doesn't need to be any higher than that. Same thing with Constitution. I can drop it down to a 12, so it's only a +1. Yes, that lowers my hit points by 1. I'm only getting a D8 of hit points every level as a rogue anyway, and my hit points are really not the point. Me being a sneaky glass cannon is the point. I'm not walking into the middle of the fray as a rogue. I'm not wandering into the middle of the fight. Yes, I want to be able to survive that, but I get that from here, from not being hit from my dexterity. So I'm dropping those 2. I'm boosting that actually by 2, and then the rest of the points are going to go right there to my charisma. So now I still have a high dex. So my AC is high, my bonus to that is high, my saving throws are high, my damage is high because it comes off of my finesse weapons and off my dexterity. Constitution, still decent. I've only lost 1 point of HP. I'll lose about that per level as I go up, 1 or 2 points of HP as I'm going through. But my intelligence is higher, so my proficiency bonus on things, especially if I decide to be an arcane trickster, that's based upon my intelligence modifier. Look at that. My wisdom is still higher, or high as it was, because that's where my perception comes from. My charisma, still decently high because I want those speech checks to be good. I could go back and change the recommended, not necessarily in this case. Athletics, acrobatics, sleight of hand, stealth, deception, and intimidation. Me personally, I'm going to change that. I want it. I like the acrobatics. That's fine. The sleight of hand, obviously important. The stealth, obviously important. You may customize your skill proficiencies in the list below. If you are proficient in a skill, you add a bonus to those skill checks, making you more likely to succeed. Cool. Skills with proficiency, skills with expertise. Your proficiency bonus is doubled for any ability check that uses either of your chosen proficiencies. Awesome. So that's where my expertise thing comes in. Well, I don't actually care about intimidating, but I get that from my background. Same thing with my athletics. I get it from my background. I'm going to change that here in a second. Anyway, where I want that to be is here. So I'm actually going to take it off of deception and put it in perception. I want to be able to see stuff. I also want to be able to persuade people. And a background of a soldier doesn't make any sense to me. How about criminal? Deception and stealth? Okay. How about urchin? Sleight of hand and stealth also makes perfect sense. Sage, arcana and history? Sure. Acolyte, charlatan? Yeah, okay. Deception, sleight of hand? Yep. Entertainer, acrobatics and performance? Yeah, sure. Outlander, athletics and survival? Yeah, see, all these things make perfect sense. Guild artisan. Skill in a particular craft has earned you membership in a mercantile guild offering privileges and protection while engaging in your art. Repairing and discovering rare crafts will bring new inspiration. Huh. Intriguing. The insight and persuasion would both be great. I don't know if I can RP that. I'm not a sage. An urchin makes the most sense. Surviving a poor and bleak childhood, know how to make the most out of every little, or very little rather. Using your street smarts bolsters your spirit for the journey ahead. Sleight of hand and stealth. I'm already getting those as bonuses anyway. Criminal, deception and stealth. Okay. Entertainer. You live to sway and subvert your audience, engaging common crowds and high society alike, preserving art and bringing joy to the hapless and downtrodden heightens your charismatic aura. Yeah, I kind of like that actually. So if I change this, Reason, perception, stealth, sleight of hand, acrobatics is already a positive 5. Performance is a +3. They're both +7s. It's ridiculous. I love it. And we're going to change this. Oh, let's see. I want to be... Oh, that is so tempting. Pair, dark vision, rapier, short sword, and hand crossbow. Let me return half elf. 12. Light armor and shields. Okay. Let's do that. That gives me the movement speed. It's the same, right? Yeah. So if I go back in here and do drow, dancing lights, still dark vision. Okay, it's not superior. Interesting. I was just curious because drow have superior dark vision up to 24 meters. I was just curious if the half elf version of them also had that. Oh no. Advantage on intelligence, wisdom, and charisma saving throws. That could be fun. Anyway, so just throwing it together real quick. I've got, obviously I went through and customized my stats. I've got, my sneak attack is sitting there. My proficiencies with the simple, the hand crossbows, rapiers, short swords, and acrobatics, sleight of hand, history. All these different things in here are bonused because of who I am. Change. There we go. So our sleight of hand, I want stealth to also be there. So I don't want deception. I want stealth. And I want stealth. There we go. So sleight of hand and stealth. Investigation. Insight. Perception, persuasion. Perception. I'll be able to find things. Persuading's good. Sleight of hand is stealth. There we go. Okay. Confirm. My plus, or my ×2 rather. World and his people. Gotta be a bonus because of my rock gnome, correct? Efficiency and history, yep. Forest gnome. Speak with animals. Deep gnome. Advantage on the stealth checks. Can see in the dark up to 24. I like it. Go back here. Sleight of hand, stealth, perception, performance, persuasion, change. Don't care about history. Perception, persuasion, confirm. I mean, I kind of do, but I don't enough. Light armor, intelligence 14, charisma 13, con 8. There, perfect. Then the last thing would be just go through and edit my appearance. So basically what I've gone through, I've picked a class, rogue. I want to be a sneaky guy who unlocks and gets in anywhere. I'm going to be a sneak thief, backstabbing assassin type character. I will probably, with this build, I would probably use them as an arcane trickster, which means I go a couple levels in. I think level 3 is when I get to choose my subclass. And then I can add some spell casting as a bonus extra. That's why I changed and gave them a higher intelligence. Even though, to be fair, I would do that anyways because it gives them a higher insight and investigation roll. But this is the kind of build that I would do for this kind of character. And do you understand why? I mean, I went through and I grabbed a custom character. I went down here first and picked that I wanted to play a rogue because that was the kind of character I want to be, a sneaky from the shadows, quick, versatile type character. And then I said, well, if I'm going to play that, I want to play a little guy. I was torn between halfling and gnome because halfling actually get a bonus where if they roll a 1, they can re-roll it, and they're considered lucky characters by nature. The deep gnome part of it, I just thought would be kind of fun because he's a little guy. It's just fun. But we're the clever, stereotypically the inventors, the high energy inventors of Faerun, of the realms. I just thought that would be kind of fun as an arcane trickster if I was an inventor type character. And I picked the deep gnome one because again, the better dark vision. But I also get gnome cunning. I get an advantage on intelligence, wisdom, and charisma saving throws. So if somebody attacks me with a magic or a mental attack that is a intelligence, wisdom, or charisma saving throw check, I get to roll twice and take the higher roll. So again, more protection for my character because of that background. So this is one of those where melding the class and the race and even the sub-race work as a good conglomeration. Earlier, because holy cow, I've been streaming for more than 2 hours now. Earlier, you probably remember that I said sometimes it's fun to play against type, where I had the dwarf monk, not a traditional dexterity class, playing a dexterity build. So that just makes sense. And this is still playing against type because a deep gnome would not be commonly thought of stereotypically, again, as an entertainer. Because I'm not going into, towns as a character that lives in the Underdark. Traditionally, I live underground. So I'm not going from town to town as an entertainer. Granted, you actually run into a deep gnome in the story. Spoiler alert again, not a big part of the story. It's just a side little fun quest. They've got him tied to a windmill and a bunch of goblins are torturing him. When you free him and you start to talk to him, you're like, I'm surprised to see you here. I thought deep gnomes were found underground in the Underdark. And he goes, oh, I see that, stereotypes and prejudice are alive and well in Faerun. And it's like, okay. So they're even calling out their own tropes. That's kind of funny. It's kind of the reason why I loved the idea of the entertainer for this, besides the fact that the acrobatics and the performance are two bonuses that I wanted to give it. The acrobatics being the special one, but engaging common crowds and high society alike. Okay, cool. The high society and common crowds, does that have to mean that it's common crowds and high society in Baldur's Gate? There's a societal structure in the Underdark for these different cultures and societies. So why couldn't it be for the king, queen, prince, and princess of whatever Underdark town or city or establishment that you're in. You know, I'm sure that there's got to be Underdark bars. And traditionally, just about every one of these different races has a drinking establishment or a social gathering establishment. So it can't be any huge surprise that there's going to be somewhere for them to congregate, and they're going to want entertainment. Ta-da! There, I've just made a backstory. Yeah, and that's all. That is entirely up to all of you. I mean, when you're going through, if you want to make a backstory for your character that goes beyond what you see here on the page, awesome, go for it. If you don't, because you're honestly looking at this as just a video game, and you don't care about anything that you can't see on the screen, that's okay too. That's entirely up to you. That's entirely your choice. That is entirely something that you get to decide. That's one of the great parts about it. Unless you are doing a multiplayer session, you got nobody to answer to but you. Okay, well, I'm actually not going to start this character because at some point I plan to play this kind of thing. I will come back here and make it all over again. But I've already made a bunch of characters. I've also been taking up a whole bunch of time because I'm like over the 2-hour mark, which I can't believe at this point. Oh, excuse me. So I'm going to get out of here. Thank you all so much for watching. For anybody who actually did pop in and take a look at the stream, or if you're watching this afterwards as a VOD, awesome, cool. Hi, how you doing? I don't think I even honestly at the beginning of this ever introduced myself, but this has been a character creation tips and tutorials. More of a tips. This is more of a, getting to know the different classes for creating characters. I'm amazed. I mean, I've seen it take an hour for somebody to create a character. I'm amazed it took me 2 hours to just go over all the nuances of a class and why you would pick them. And that's without even getting into all of the different races. So I guess there's going to have to be another stream where I go into the races and why you would pick one over another and go with that. And then maybe at some point, if you guys are interested, I'll go through and actually just create one. We'll schedule it and I'll create one live and we'll go through and do something with some input for what we want to see. Maybe we'll throw some polls up and we'll go from there. But I hope you all have a great day. This has been Dr. Mick. Thanks for being curious with me. Don't be too critical. Have a great day and enjoy the rest of it with fair winds and following seas. Later, y'all.